so that I know you're there. Brilliant. I can see Isabel and Joshua and other people. I can see Noreen, I see Yvri. That's great. And somebody clapping. Who's that? Oh, waving, Juliet. I get my emojis mixed up. Ayu, Basharat, Kingi, Ruben, and more people in the chat as well. Yushan, Molly, Hoda, welcome. Welcome back. Chris, Amelia, fantastic. Abraham, brilliant. The gang's all here, as we used to say when I was little. So we're back. You can see Yihui and Abraham as well. We're back for our second hour. And in the first hour, we looked at what your examiners are there to do in the Viva. See Amin as well. We also talked a little bit about what to do before submission, or what to do to get support from other people. And again, I am going to be following that up. So the follow-up email, one of the handouts for that will be directly related just to getting support from other people. So just if you're looking for anything from someone else, if you need something from your supervisor or your colleagues, then there's going to be some practical suggestions there and some related points to that. I want to focus mostly, there are some exceptions, but mostly now on what you can do, rather what you need to do to get ready. I want to do something a little bit different to start us off. I can see Amin and Tommaso in the chat as well. Just a quick question to the chat. Before we get into Viva Prep, how do you want to feel when you finished your Viva Prep? How do you want to feel? And you send that to me privately if you want, but just for a second, whilst we're all still setting up again, how do you want to feel when you finish your Viva Prep? Let's see. Thank you. This is very generous. Thank you all. Excited, confident, reassured, confident, relieved, proud of my work, relieved. Someone sent privately, relief and proud, challenged and fulfilled, prepared, reassured in my knowledge. Thank you for this, Isabel. Reassured in my knowledge, but probably still be nervous. More excited about talking to someone about my work rather than worried about the unknown. Confident. Thank you all for this. This is really, and again, I want to say thank you for sharing it. I mean, it's a generous thing because, you know, you can, when you hear what other people say or when you see it in the chat, that you can see whether that resonates with you or not, or whether it's something different for yourself. One of the things that I've become most, I suppose, interested as a side part of the work that I do is the idea that, you know, for a lot of the way that we feel about things, there isn't a simple button to press. You know, there isn't a simple button that you can press, unfortunately, and you just press it on the side of your head and now you feel confident, you know, or now you feel prepared. You know, you have to act, you have to do things to get to that place. So if you want to feel confident, you have to do things that will lead towards that. If you want to feel reassured, or if you want to feel proud of your work, you have to do things that build that up. And maybe your journey already on your PhD, maybe the work you've already done more often than not makes you feel that way. But if not, then Viva Prep is certainly the space to do this. In short, if you want to feel excited or confident or reassured or proud or challenged or fulfilled, then you need to find tasks and activities to do that will lead to that. And that could be different for a lot of people. You know, you all have such a variety of feelings or the things that you want to feel. I think, though, that what I'm about to propose for Viva Prep, the kind of things I'm going to propose, will tick most, if not all, of these boxes. We're going to talk explicitly about confidence in about an hour, although I think Viva Prep certainly can help with that. This image that I have here, I should have said earlier, by the way, that most... Yeah, I think all of the images that I'm going to share today have come from a public domain image site. That's why there's no attribution, is because these are images that are just in the public domain. When I saw this image of a little bridge, about a year ago, it jumped out to me that this little bridge is what Viva Prep is all about. This little bridge over a little stream is Viva Prep. Because Viva Prep is work that you need to do. It's something you need to build up. But it's nothing too big. It's nothing too grand. It's quite a simple process, a simple construction. And the gap that you're trying to cross is not that big. But between where you are at submission and where you are for the Viva doesn't have to be a great big gap. It's not a great big gap. And for some of you, you might just be able to jump it. You might be able to step across. But to stretch this metaphor to breaking point, why risk getting your shoes wet? Why risk jumping that gap or do no work and just try and step across when you could do some simple work, just a very small amount of work really, and be ready? Be prepared, feel reassured, feel excited. I have 6 things that I want to share, and I'm going to dig into some of them in depth. And as we go through, I imagine that you're going to have questions, what about this? What about that? Feel free to just pop them in the chat whenever, and I'll come to them as soon as I can, as soon as there's a good point there to weave it in. But I want to talk about 6 things. And then to round off this little point, I just want to talk a little bit about how you do this work, because I think it really is a small piece of work. I think there's maybe 20 to 30 hours of work for most candidates. It doesn't have to be done in a rush. It doesn't have to be done under pressure unless that's what you need. There's a lot of time to do this kind of work, and there's a lot of opportunity to break this work up. So there's going to be 2 slides here with 3 points on each, and there will be some follow-up stuff in the follow-up email as well. But as we go through, please do ask if you have questions. Starting point is a lot of book work in many ways. But the very first thing I think that's sensible to do as part of Viva Prep is to read your thesis. And again, remember, you're going to have it with you in the Viva, so you don't need to memorize it. You don't need to get every last detail crammed up here somewhere. Just read it. Have it make sense. You understand the flow of information. You remember how the chapters are sequenced, things like that. You remember where things are, but you don't remember every detail. Your examiners don't expect you to memorize your thesis. They expect you to kind of know it because you did it, but they don't expect you to memorize it. My encouragement for all of you, my suggestion would be to take a break when you submit. Take a break. I think somebody suggested this earlier, that they've done that, or they had a holiday or something. I've forgotten who it was now. Can't find it. But yeah, take a break, come back to your thesis and read it once, but that doesn't mean read it all in one go. Of course, take an afternoon off, read your thesis maybe, but you could just as easily break it up into a chapter a day or an hour a day for however long it takes. Just make sure you read it carefully. Don't skim it. Make sure you've read your thesis after submission. I think that's a good starting point, because really a lot of Viva Prep builds on your thesis. So having that be the foundation and the beginning point for your Viva Prep, I think really makes sense. If you want to reread parts of it, then that's up to you. If there's a need there, going back to that first question before, what do you need to do? If you feel you need to reread your thesis or to focus on something in particular, then that's what you should do. But I don't think there's a strong general need to just constantly read the thesis. I think reading your thesis is a good starting point, and then move on to annotating your thesis, to adding notes, to adding ink, to adding stuff in the margins and at the page edge, to make your thesis a more useful resource for the Viva. Because when you go to your Viva, you take your thesis with you, and that has to be, if you like, the same thesis as your examiners. You can't make corrections or additions or add an appendix or another chapter. You can't do that. It's the same thesis. But you can make yours a special edition. Make your thesis a one-of-a-kind special edition for your Viva, where it is more useful for you. Where things are easier to find because maybe you've stuck bookmarks in key places, or things on the page are easier to see because you put notes in the margins or underlined things to make things stand out. Annotate your thesis to make it useful for you. Again, that key question for Viva Prep, and maybe the emphasis is on the you. What do you need to do? I think annotation really serves two purposes, because if you do a good job, you have a good resource for the Viva, where you can find things, where you can see things at a glance. That's a really good outcome. But another good part of it is the process, is sitting down with your thesis and taking some time and to focus, on what really matters. Does it matter that can you find things more easily? If you stick a post-it note at the start of each chapter for a physical copy, then that's something that's really straightforward. But maybe you want other kinds of information to stand out. Maybe every time you've made a good point, you want to, stick a little green highlighter tab in, or maybe you want to underline typos just to keep track of them. Maybe you want to highlight key references or key pieces of data to make that stand out to you. Doing that work is good because it means you have this good outcome, but it's also really good because eventually, while you're doing the work, you're really focusing on what matters about your thesis. Typos aside, you're focusing on the really important stuff. So annotating your thesis, I think, is a really good thing to do. I'll say a little bit more about that in a second, but I just spotted Jenny's question there. As you now submit online, you don't have a printed copy. Would I recommend a hard copy for the Viva? I wouldn't go so far as recommending a hard copy, printed copy, simply because everyone is different. My preference for something like this would be paper, because I think for me it would be easier to navigate, to look around and also to make additions. But certainly, certainly most computers now, most systems come with PDF annotation. I do it all the time on my iPad. So that's. I don't think there's a strong argument either way. I'd say just check the regulations again to make sure whether or not you need to provide a printed copy for the Viva, for yourself, because sometimes regulations do change and sometimes they don't. But yeah, if there's no regulation there and you feel confident in annotating it digitally and then having it on a screen, on a tablet, on a small computer, then go with that. And there's probably a lot of really good advice out there as well for annotating PhD theses, for the Viva. I've not for digitally. I've not come across that, but I might make a note of it to see if I can find the link. Thanks for the thought, Jenny. Just to come back to the point here on the screen, though, so whether you're going to do this for a printed copy or for a digital copy, I think it's useful to make two lists for annotation. Because out of all the things I'm going to suggest for Viva Prep, this is the one thing that I think could become a real time sink. If you're not careful, this could be the thing that attracts your attention and you could just keep doing more and more and more, whether or not you need to. So I think you do need to annotate your thesis, but I don't think it's the biggest part of Viva Prep or the most important part. It is essential, but there's more important stuff. First of all, make a list of what you need to add. If you've read your thesis, things will stand out to you. Like for your list of things you might need to be able to find the start of chapters. You might need to be able to find key sections. You might need to be able to see at a glance when you've used a data set, or see at a glance a key reference. If you have a list, if you just give it a little bit of thought, what do you need? Then make a parallel list for how you're going to do that. How are you going to meet that need with your thesis? So the start of a chapter could be as simple as a post-it note at the edge of the page. Again, doing this physically. If you're going to try and mark out different kinds of information, though, you could use little highlighter tabs. If you're trying to make references stand out, or you could use just a simple highlighter. If you're going to try and make typos stand out, you could underline things, with a red pen. If you want to add notes to the margin, then just think about what that's for. Because the margin, a thesis is printed with large borders, but they're not that big. Realistically, they're for adding a couple of words rather than a little paragraph that you then have to peer in closely at. Really think about what you're doing so you can do this annotation work simply, consistently, and in a sort of a finite way. This really should be a part of Viva prep rather than just an ongoing project until you get to the Viva. To prepare well, I think you need to read your thesis. I think you need to annotate your thesis. I think it's also really useful to take a little bit of time to create some summaries as well. There's definitely an advantage, a really big benefit to talking about your work. I'm going to come to that after on the next slide, but related to that is just this, I suppose, solo version, if you like, of sitting back, reflecting on what your thesis is, why it's good, or some aspect of it, and then finding a question and a way to gather your thoughts. I think there is something that's really useful about that, because you might have 200 pages in your thesis, but your examiners are not going to ask you a question for each of them. You might have 7 chapters, but there'll be different kinds of information, there'll be different kinds of words that you use to describe and to structure what you've done. Not every single word in your thesis is up for discussion. It could be useful to find questions that highlight some of the things that you really think will be talked about, or things that could be helpful. So this idea of creating summaries is something that I'm really curious about. I think there's something here that's really interesting. And so if you go and look on Viva Survivors and search for posts that are tagged Viva Prep and summary and so on, you'll find some ideas. But I just want to share 3 thoughts, 3 processes that I think can be really useful. And the first one, very simply, I'm going to number them in the chat now, is to create an edited bibliography. So you might have, in fact, let me ask this question for those of you who know, how many references do you have in your how many references do you have in your bibliography? There's no prize for this, by the way, for whoever has the most, but I'm curious, how many do you have? All the page number, 50 pages worth. So 8 to 10 to a page, maybe. That's a lot. Thank you, Molly. Anybody else got an estimate or no? It's about 327. Surath, around 160. Esra, too much, too many, 150. Hannah, that's a good question, Hannah, and I'll come back to that in a second if that's okay. 40 pages from Yushan, 220, 40 pages. What you're seeing, 200 reps, what you're seeing here in this, the difference is really, it really speaks to the fact that every thesis is unique, but also maybe that there are disciplinary differences. There might be differences in expectations within departments, within sort of fields rather. I had 61 references. 61 for my whole thesis. Others in my department had a little bit more maybe, but in maths, at least in my office that I shared, we just didn't have a lot. Just generally, the people had between 70 and 100 generally. I just came on right the extreme lower end. But 61 is a lot. Esra gave like a really true response before. Too much. too many. There's just so much there. Obviously, there's not too much for what you've done, but in the sense that it's a lot of information. Now, number one, your examiners will not expect you to know all of these, with photographic recall. They just won't. And number two, your examiners will not look at your bibliography and say, tell me about this one. They just won't pick one at random. But what they might do is focus on a particular reference that's important or on work that's related to that. So I think that's why I would suggest that all of you, again, it's just a suggestion, think about what you need to do. But my suggestion would be to create an edited bibliography. If you have 40 pages, if you have 320 references, to begin with, what's the top 10? What are the top 10 most useful references? What are the things that have helped you the most whilst you've been doing your research? Maybe it's a paper that sets out some methods that you needed. Maybe it was something which had the question that you're responding to, or a data set. Who knows? Again, everybody's different. Everyone's research is different. What are your top 10? You take a little bit of time, take an hour, go through your thesis if something isn't jumping out, but what are the top 10 references? Write them down. Again, it's useful sometimes to reflect, but write them down. Gather your thoughts and make sense of them. Don't just write a list of the names of papers and the authors, the journals, but maybe one or two sentences about why that particular reference helps you or helps your work. What's the difference that it makes? Now, I'm suggesting writing summaries not as scripting. So a summary is not a script that you take with you to the Viva or some resource that you recall in the Viva. That's what your thesis is for. This is to help you gather your thoughts before the Viva. This is to get you thinking about useful things. So that's what an edited bibliography could do. But my second suggestion would be to create a kind of overview of your thesis. I don't mean an abstract, I don't mean sort of like just an introduction, but a one page, so literally like 1 page of paper, 1 sheet of paper overview of your thesis. And I have 3 questions that I think could help with this that I'm going to put in the chat just now. I like to think of why, how, and what. Just very simply, take a sheet of paper, take a new page in a document, divide it into 3, and use those 3 questions to structure. It's a very short overview. And obviously, you're not going to go into the ultimate depths of your work. You're not going to speak about everything, but just very simply, why did you do this research? How did you do it? And what was the result? Why, how, and what? And it's certainly true that these sorts of questions, at least that first one, why did you do this? That's a possible Viva starter question. Your examiners, one of them could ask you this at the start of your Viva, saying, why did you want to do this? Why this project? Why are you interested, and so on? That could be the way in, but that's not the suggestion here. That's not the only reason I'm suggesting this. These sorts of things, that overview, that summary, that big picture, that is often a good starting point for a Viva anyway, even if it's not in those particular words. Spending some time in advance, drawing your thoughts together, capturing some ideas, capturing what matters is useful. It's a useful information to sort of really focus in on and really consider, the words that you use, the things that matter. Again, you don't need to memorize this. You don't need to remember every detail in the Viva of what you write here, but it's just a chance for you to really consider and think, what would I say? What do I really need to focus in on here? Someone's asked, could it be personal? Someone just asked this privately, when you're asking, why did you do this research? Could it be a personal reason? And absolutely, it could be. Some people do research because they because it's a stepping stone. They do a PhD because they want to get onto something else. They want to be an academic, and it's career, and that's their reason. Some people, the reason is that there was a project available. They wanted to do a PhD, they didn't know what they wanted to do it on, and this particular supervisor had this particular project. I wanted to do a PhD because I didn't know what else to do. I'm really honest. Almost 20 years ago, I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And doing a PhD and being part of that community seemed like a good idea. I think it was. But yeah, it could be hyper personal. I've heard some incredible stories over the years, the reasons why people do PhDs, and those are just as valid as anything that is directly research based. So yeah, could definitely be a personal thing. I think, or you could do it for your employer as well, that works too. One more thought though about creating summaries is sometimes if you look at a blank page and you think, I want to make some notes. I want to make some notes on my methods. I want to make some notes on my conclusions. I want to write a summary. A blank page can be quite intimidating. And so if you sit down to write something and just think, I don't know what to write, I would encourage you just to remember 2 words. Just 2 words to start that process. What's important? What's important? What do you need to start with? What's the first thing? Just what's important? What's important about your methods? What's important about your conclusions? Fundamentally, it's behind the question for the edited bibliography, which papers are most important. If you find yourself stuck, if you sit down to write something and you just can't begin because it's a blank page or because you're tired, but this is the time you set aside to do some prep, just ask yourself what's important, and something will come. This is the one thing I think that can unstick. Just start that process. And once you've started, that's enough. Once you've started, you're moving, you can keep going. But what's important is a useful starter. Now, as I said a few minutes ago, actually 15 minutes ago, I think, Viva Prep begins with a lot of book work. And there was a question before from Hanan. So I'm glad that popped back into my head. Sorry, 10 minutes ago, Hanan. Thank you for being so patient. Regarding reading the thesis, is it useful to read it the whole thesis and then chapter by chapter, or read it chapter by chapter? That's a really good question. My response to that basically is you have to do what works for you. I mean practically. If you have a situation where you can take a whole afternoon off and you can sit down for a couple of hours and read your thesis and then stop and go for a walk and come back and finish it, then that's great. That works. But if for any other reason, you want to just read a chapter today, chapter the next, that's all good too. There's no right or wrong way to do this, I think, other than you just have to do it, and obviously do it carefully. Read it carefully. A lot of what I'm going to say to round out, talking about prep in a few minutes, kind of mirrors that. Most of what I'm going to suggest for reading, annotating, creating summaries, and the things on the next page, most of Viva Prep can be broken down into small pieces. There are very few things which are just, they have to be big. They have to be a certain time commitment all in one go. Some of those you can do by choice, like if you choose to sit down and read your thesis in one go. Some of them, like a mock Viva, which we'll talk about soon, that's kind of the point, is that it is just one thing. But again, the starting point for Viva Prep is book work. Read, annotate, create summaries. Got another page. This one won't be up for 15 minutes, so if you want to take a screen grab or something, or write some quick notes, that's fine too. But in some ways, the first page of this is the previous page is the longer activities. They tend to take longer than these 3. But these 3 are just as important. First of all, just take a look, maybe take an hour or hour and a half, and have a look and see what's been published recently. that could be relevant to your interests. Now, the goal here is not to find more things to add to your thesis, but just to keep being good, just to keep aware of the way your discipline and your field is developing. And you could do that by checking preprint servers or journals that you're familiar with. It could be that you just have a conversation with your supervisor or some friends, and just see what stands out. Is there anything there that's relevant to your interests? Is there anything there that you need to be aware of going into the Viva? But it is not about finding more things to add. I talked a little bit about this second point before, about researching your examiners. I think I covered it all then, but again, just in case anyone was away from the computer for a second, take a look at your examiner's last 2 or 3 papers. This is not about getting expert level knowledge about what they do. It is purely about making sure that you're familiar with their work, so that you can see if there are any connections, if there are any parallels with your work, if there might even be things that you want to bring up directly. But I really do want to emphasize this. You do not have to be an expert in your examiner's work in order to meet with them in the Viva. I think having a little bit of familiarity is a little bit respectful, maybe, but also it's just kind of doing your due diligence. It's making sure that you have what you need. Sorry, I've just spotted Hanan's second sort of follow-up there. I'll read it in full first and then go in detail. I think you have to judge that for yourself. Again, it's not. I don't see that there's a hard and fast, like, definite way that you have to do that. Like, it could be that you read the whole thesis and you then feel like you want to review things a bit more. It could be that you just go in depth to begin with. I think you have to judge for yourself based on your own experience what works best for you. You're welcome. The last point on this slide, though, and the last point about Viva prep really is crucial. I can't understate this enough. You have to find rehearsal opportunities before the Viva, because everything else that I've talked about is book work, it's reading, it's making notes, and all of that is useful. All of it's essential, but none of it is like what you will do in the Viva. Because in the Viva, you have to talk. And more than that, you have to respond to questions. That's not you will. I mean, you will, but you have to. And that's one of the things that people can be most worried about. Will I find the words? Will I remember things? What will it feel like? If you find rehearsal opportunities, then you can experience that for yourself. Mock Viva is usually seen as the gold standard for rehearsal opportunities because it's a meeting with your supervisor and maybe another academic colleague so that they can directly simulate that experience for you. Of course, the questions won't be identical because they won't have done as much preparation as your examiners will, and your examiners might have their own thoughts, of course, and their own sort of things that they want to focus on. But a mock Viva should successfully give you that experience of being there for a couple of hours and having a structured discussion, semi-structured, let's say, that's all about your thesis and your research. Every single person that I've spoken to or heard from over the years who has had a mock Viva has told me that it was immensely helpful for their Viva. And some would go so far as to say it was the most important thing that they did. And having said that, it's not the only option for a rehearsal opportunity. And there are many reasons why you might not want to, or just might not be able to have a mock Viva, just scheduling, just availability. It could be sometimes that you just don't feel comfortable doing that with your supervisor. But there are other options. You could go for coffee with friends and just have a discussion, have a chat. You could get a seminar and take questions. There's going to be a follow-up. I've got a new resource. I made it myself over the summer, and I'm very excited that you're one of the first groups to get it. But look for the follow-up. On the follow-up, there'll be a micro Vivas resource. So a set of questions, a bit of structure that you can share with a friend. You can just sit down with them, and they can give you a little bit of practice, a little bit of rehearsal. And there's other resources like this on Viva Survivors, the website, and there'll be links to that in the follow-up. But all of these rehearsal opportunities are really aimed at building up confidence in the kind of work that you'll then need to do in the Viva. Because again, you will need to do that in the Viva. I started this little section and the slide with the bridge on asking you, what do you need to do? And these are the kinds of work you need to do. I'm really not suggesting that you only do the things that I've said. I think the examples for summaries are really good. In my experience, people find them useful, but they might not meet your particular needs. These are 6 areas that can help lead people to feeling reassured, relieved, prepared, confident, but you might need to do something particular as well. There might be some gaps there for you. I would encourage all of you then, if you've not started your Viva prep yet, because it's not quite the time or whatever, then take a moment soon to just sketch out a plan. Think about your life. Think about your availability. When are you busy? When are you free? Because all of this work really is 20 to 30 hours of work. And for some of you, you might think, okay, that's 2 weeks. I can do all of that in 2 weeks with everything that I have going on. But if you have a busy family life, if you have a busy work life, then maybe 3 or 4 weeks is better. Maybe half an hour to an hour most days is a kind of way to break that up. And that would be one of my key suggestions with all of this is, you need to do this work, but you don't need to add to whatever stress or pressure you already feel. Be kind to yourself. Find a way to make this work fit and realistically do that by planning a little bit in advance. Think about when and how you're going to do things. But also remember, just as a closing thought here, that I'm suggesting that you do 20 to 30 hours of work, for some of you in the very near future. And that's not nothing. But remember as well that you probably have between 5,500 or 6,000 hours of work behind you. A full-time PhD shakes out, with some reasonable assumptions, to be 5,500 to 6,000 hours of work. And you can trust me on that because I used to be a mathematician. I can still do the sums. All of those thousands of hours of work go with you. That's in the mix as well. This is 20 to 30 hours of focused work on very particular outcomes to just get ready for this particular challenge. So be kind to yourself, plan ahead, and then get those bits of work done. That would be my suggestion. Now, if we need to dig deeper into any of those topics, then do let me know. But before we take our break in about 10, 15 minutes, I just want to spend a little bit of time focusing in on specifically on some aspects of expectations. Of course, we've talked about this a little bit already, and we'll continue to talk about expectations in lots of different ways in the next hour as well. But I just want to talk a little bit about what Vivas are really like. And to do that, I have to share one very short 2-panel comic strip, which I think most of you will be familiar with. But I think this is the best way to summarize how people think about the Viva generally. And thank you, Ruben. But I do mean this genuinely. I do it for the laughing emojis, but I do mean this literally as well. So before the Viva, I think many candidates think the Viva is going to be like the situation on the left. On the left panel, we have our little friend who's looking quite smart. They've got a little hat on their head. They're sat at a table. You'll notice that their eyes are fixed. They are focused. But all around them is danger. Let's put it like that. There's a lot of uncertainty about how close that is and what's really going on. That's how people imagine the Viva will be. But on the right is afterwards. Somebody who is the same person, their eyes are more relaxed, the smile is quite genuine, And the focus, you'll notice, is now on them. And they say, this is fine. And in my experience, the vast majority of PhD candidates or people who come out of the Viva say this is fine, but they don't say why. It's like, scene missing. We don't know what happens in that little gap, that little white gap in the middle of the thing. We don't know what happens there, because typically people come out of the Viva and say it was fine, and then they go and celebrate, or then they have to get on with their work because they're busy and so on. And the stories don't get shared. There's a general sense that Vivas are fine, but uncertainty about why they are fine. And that's what I want to kind of fill in the blanks on over the next 2 slides, because as I said, I've interviewed a lot of people, I've spoken to more, I've done the research, and I think I can show you a picture of the Viva that isn't a little comic strip, as nice as that is, but which can give you a real sense of what to expect. Every Viva, there are 33 of you here, every Viva that each of you will have will be unique. But that doesn't mean that it needs to be a great big unknown. We have 2 slides here, and not very many points actually on these slides to really paint this picture. So I don't think it's the most important thing that you need to know, but it's certainly the question that I've been asked the most in the last decade or so about, the question basically is, how long will my Viva be? And honestly, I don't know. I don't know how long your Viva will be, but what I can tell you realistically, what you're trying to do is build up a picture and see what to expect. I think reasonably, you can expect your Viva to be at least 2 hours. At least 2 hours, because for all of the statistical differences, and there are some differences between different disciplines, for example, the different expectations, the overall picture says that 50% of Vivas are 2 hours or longer. And realistically and responsibly, the best thing that I can then say is expect that yours will be, rather than hope that yours will be over really quickly. There's a chance. There's like a 1 in 10 chance that your Viva could be finished within an hour. But do you really want to just hope for that? Or do you want to expect and then prepare to be there and to be discussing things and to build up the energy for that? In the Viva, there's no rush. That's really what all these statistics say. There is no rush. You can take your time to think, and it's a good thing to do that. You can take your time, you can have breaks, you can ask for breaks at any point if you need them for any reason at all, whether it's a bathroom break, whether it's to refill your water bottle on a hot day, whether it's to, something medical. Maybe there's a medical reason why you need to have a break. That's all fine. You can take your time. There is no correlation between the length of the Viva and the outcome. Some people have really short Vivas, some people have really long Vivas. It doesn't have an impact statistically. There's no correlation or causation there on the outcome. Most people, remember, get minor corrections as a result. So, not the most important question, but something that really can help set the scene, actually. A key expectation is related to the people who are there, though. And obviously you're one of those people, and we will come back to that. But a key expectation for your examiners is that they will be ready for all of the homework that they've done, for all of the preparation that they've done. They will be ready, but they also have roles in the Viva, as internal as external. They have roles, and some of that's a little bit distinct. Sometimes the internal has some responsibility to make sure that the regulations are being followed. There is a separate little role there, but really, they kind of have the same role. Their role is to ask questions. Their role is to do their job, to be prepared. And there are situations where you can have more than 2 examiners. If anyone is in that situation where they will have a 3rd examiner, and that's their title, that's their role, then let me know. But it doesn't make a lot of difference. It's just more people being present and being part of the discussion. Whatever your examiners, whoever they are, whether they're internal or external, again, they're there to do their job. Their job is to ask questions, to motivate that discussion and gather the evidence that they need, which means that any question that they ask is being asked for a reason. It's being asked to uncover a bit of information, to clarify something, to check something, to explore. But they're not being asked to injure you. They're not being asked to tear your work apart. They're not being asked for small and petty reasons. You know, every question in the Viva is an opportunity for you to demonstrate something, to demonstrate what you know, what you've done, what you can do, or even just to show how you think. Your examiners will be ready for the Viva, and they have specific roles. You know, there's a purpose, there's a push behind what they're doing. There are also two other potential roles in the Viva, and both of those, you know, we could think of them mostly as observers, but there's two particular kinds that I'm thinking of. In the first case, we have the independent chair. I'm just going to write this in the chat in case anyone not come up with this, come across this term before. But the independent chairperson, so a member of staff from Sheffield who is observing the Viva and making sure that it goes well, and making sure that it is a fair process for you, making sure your examiners are doing what they need to, and that they're not going outside of sort of the boundaries of what they really, you know, they're not going too deep into a topic, they're not going too far off topic. That's what an independent chairperson does. They don't ask you questions, they don't examine you, but they examine in a way the Viva. Was this a good process? Was this fair? I would encourage you to find out whether or not you'll have an independent chairperson, because that helps you to set your own expectations, to get a sense of what your particular Viva will be like. And another kind of observer, though, is your supervisor. So supervisors can attend Vivas, but crucially, they can only attend the Viva if you give them permission to. So if you want your supervisor at the Viva, then you can say yes, you can invite them, that's fine. But if you don't want them present, then you can just say no. You can just say, I'd rather you weren't, or I think that might be a little bit, it might make me nervous. Whatever, you know, reasonable thing you have to say. There's good reasons for them to be there, though. You know, if it feels okay, if you want to have a witness to you doing this, if you want somebody to make notes on your behalf, that's all fine. But it's your choice. Let's come back to though in terms of expectations. You know, the Viva is going to flow from what your examiners say. It's a discussion, so it is going in both directions. You can ask questions too. You can sort of check your thesis. You can ask your examiners for their opinions on things as well. That's fine. But for the most part, the Viva is going to be structured from the questions, from the notes, the ideas that your examiners have put together. And very often, I mean, starter questions aside, those questions and the flow of the Viva will follow the flow of your thesis. Because obviously you've written your thesis in a certain way. You've presented and structured the information in a certain way. And so it kind of follows that they would do that too. So whether you have one project for your thesis, whether you have 5 papers that you've presented, they'll follow the information as you've presented it. And that doesn't mean that you can't skip ahead. You know, if they're asking you something about methods, then you could talk about your outcomes and the outputs of those methods or experiments. Of course, you can do that if it helps you to expand on the point. But your examiner's initial plan will probably follow that structure. So keep that in mind, maybe. Opening questions, though, it's something we'll come back to, actually. Come back to opening questions after the break. Main thing to keep in mind, I think, that I would really encourage with this is, again, this is a discussion. So even though your examiners are leading that, even though they'll have more of the questions, you know, being the people who are asking more of those questions, it's not strictly speaking a Q&A. Because each question is really opening a space up to talk rather than just seeking one particular thing. There can be clarifying questions, there can be definitive seeking questions, but really it's about getting you talking about the work and about yourself. And with all of that said, it's right, once again, to say that the Viva is a challenge, and you can expect it to be difficult. Regardless of how you feel today, it's not wrong to feel nervous before the Viva, because the Viva is important. And feeling nervous doesn't mean that you can't also be confident. That's something I am going to talk about directly just after the break. You know, you can be nervous and you can be confident. And you can be nervous because you don't necessarily know what your examiners think about your work. You can have hopes. You can hope that they think a certain thing, but you don't know. You can expect questions maybe, but you don't know what those questions are till they're asked. And of course, your Viva is important. You know, whatever your reason for doing it, whatever your plans, what comes next, this is important. And we feel nervous about important things. But if you think about it, you practically have done things like this many times before. Every time you've sat down to talk about your work with anyone, you've been in a situation a little bit like the Viva. Obviously at very different stages with very different understandings and different people for different purposes, but the simple act of talking about your work and someone asking you a question that you didn't expect, being forced to think and discuss, is something that you all have a lot of experience with. And this is different, but you do have that experience. It's not so difficult. It's only difficult. It's not impossible. Vivas happen in a lot of different situations. It used to be very simply, you know, there would be a seminar room. You know, you'd find out a few weeks before where it was going to be, and that was that. But with 2020 and everything that's happened since then, it is possible that your Viva could be online. Somebody today has mentioned that theirs could be over video. So let me say it as simply as this. Before your Viva, whatever your situation is going to be, it's a good idea to check that space out. You know, if you're going to be in person, check the room, look for, you know, does it feel okay? You know, does it have a whiteboard or a flip chart stand if you need one? Are there any distractions that you need to be aware of? Things like that. You know, where are the exits? Where's the nearest bathroom? All sorts of really practical things like that. You don't have to do any big visualization exercises or anything like that. I'm not thinking about those sorts of things, but just think, you know, this is where I'm going to be doing it. Do I need to do anything to help myself? I think if you're going to have your Viva online, like Amin, or maybe like some other people here, then of course, check the technology in advance. Check that you're comfortable using that software. And I would also suggest directly practice with it. You know, today, there's just me talking and all of you have your cameras off. So I'm looking for responses in the chat. And even with just like a really small question, or even with putting the poll up before, there is a delay. And I'm attuned to that now because I've been doing this for a long time, but there is a delay if you're just having a conversation over video. There's that little pause, and it takes a little bit of practice to really understand that rhythm. But that practice can help. I would encourage all of you, if you're going to be over video, or any of you who are going to be over video rather, practice in advance. And I think there is going to be a link related to video Vivas in the follow-up email, but if anyone's got any more questions about that, do let me know. I imagine video Vivas are probably in the minority today, but if you've got direct questions about that, let me know. Just to finish off before we take our break, let me share two more expectations. Number one, a big one for the Viva is that you do need resources. You need to have your thesis with you in a format that is easy for you to access. You do need to have pen and paper. It's going to be useful to make notes throughout the Viva, even if like most of the time you're just discussing things, there'll be things that you want to make a note of, or you can use making a note as a way to take a very quick break to think. And also, and particularly if your Viva's in the next few weeks, you're really going to need some water because it's thirsty work to talk for a long period of time. Maybe just think if there's other things you need, you know, really practical things like, do you need a lift? Do you need a lift to get into the Viva? Do you need, like I've got like a nice little cushion behind me to help, you know, your posture and so on. What do you need? What do you need to help you with your Viva? And think about what other people tell you. Think about how other people approach this situation. One final key expectation for the Viva, though, from your examiners and from the situation. One expectation is that you are up to the challenge. You arrive and you're going to succeed. They expect that. Realistically, they expect that the person they're going to meet is the person who's done the work, is the person who can respond to their questions. They expect that, but you might not feel that way. You might feel quite nervous, or you might feel a lack of confidence. But that's something we're going to talk about directly after the break. We're going to take another break now. Let's say I'll come back. My clock's just ticked over to 12:01. Let's say I'll be back in 7 minutes, 12:08. Plenty of time to talk about the day of the Viva and confidence, and also plenty of time to respond to questions if you have them. I'll put the register link one more time, and if anyone has had any difficulties and you've not told me already, let me know so that I can record your name. But I'll be back in about 6.5 minutes.